Doesn't this look like the album for Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody? Kind of like that image of them just standing there right before they're getting massacred and that song comes up. Someone should put the massacre of the Separatist High Council to that song. But anyway, guys, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan, and today I want to talk about something that's kind of interesting. At the end of the Clone Wars, so many things were happening in the galaxy. The Separatist High Command surrendered, the droid army was shut down, the Jedi tried to kill Palpatine, and as a result, Palpatine's face now resembled the loose and saggy skin on one's ballsack. Which, interestingly enough, was really a tentpole event for speculation from plastic surgery influencers on the HoloNet. It was a wild week. Centuries worth of history happened in days, which means that the galaxy's attention was always elsewhere. While some pretty significant things were happening, especially in the Outer Rim, in the Separatist Heartland, where the defeated citizens of the Confederacy were waking up to a new and pretty horrifying reality. The upstart government that they had joined in rebellion against the Republic had lost, and to make matters worse, there was increasing evidence that the corrupt corporate entities that essentially exploited and oppressed the Outer Rim had actually been responsible for the whole movement. At the same time, the Republic, which they resented, had now occupied their territory, and in a worrying step, relabeled themselves as the Galactic Empire. Out of the dehydrator into the air fryer, as a millennial would say. So what do all these worlds do without advocates, without watchdog groups, without independent media, on the HoloNets keeping an eye on things? Well, let's see. In the last hours of the Clone Wars, Darth Sidious convinced the remaining members of the Separatist Council to gather at Mustafar. The war had already been lost, Dooku had been killed over Coruscant, General Grievous was cheap-shotted by Kenobi in a very uncivilized way at Utapau. And yeah, all of these formerly powerful corporate warlords, financial wizards, industrial tycoons, princes of the universe, or at least in a free market, found themselves hiding in the equivalent of your mom's basement as the feds finally close in on your location after finding you in the boys' messenger chat. I mean, really, guys? Mental illness Olympics with a double elimination bracket? Anyway, those poor CEOs and chairmen thought that they would be safe hiding on Mustafar from the monsters when the monsters were already in the room with them. Now, Mustafar was never a culturally significant world for the Separatist Alliance. Its main export was rocks and lava. But it would become a symbol for the end of the Separatist movement and also of Anakin Skywalker's relationship with Padme, which was a problem for the planet because Darth Vader wanted to wallow in his own suffering and torment and establish a permanent base on the planet known as Fortress Vader. Prior to this, the Mustafarians had only joined the Separatists because they were hoping to score, some new contracts for mineral exports. This was a relatively young planet, as you can tell by the volcanic activity on its surface. Anyway, during the Clone Wars, Mustafar wasn't really contested that much. You could say that it was pretty unaffected by the conflict. The Mustafarians weren't very devout followers of Count Dooku or anything like that. And I guess, mainly people avoided the planet because it just wasn't that hospitable. And so aside from the mineral mining operations and a large black sun presence, most people avoided the planet with good reason. But once the war ended, the Black Suns were removed. The Mustafarians' operations were then taken over by the Mining Guild, or at least overseen by them, and Darth Vader became obsessed with resurrecting Padme through the use of ancient Force magic. There's actually a whole VR lightsaber experience game that is tied to this story. I highly recommend you guys check it out. I personally skipped it, but that's because I'm more of a run at a Jedi with a detonator vest type of guy. And so as a result, the Empire's mining operation only sped up the degradation of the planet's environment and tectonic stability, and now there was a spooky Black Mordor-like fortress on the Gahean Plains. Things definitely got worse with the Mustafarians. And on a clear night, when the wind is blowing the right way, if you listen closely, you can hear a Sith singing in baritone, How to Save a Life by the Fray. The real question is he talking about himself or Padme? The planet Araxis had a powerful history descending all the way back to the Tion hegemony. The world was originally quite beautiful and lush with vegetation, with a temperate climate, but in the late Republic period, corrupt politicians from Araxis like Senator Larrick sold the planet out to large industrial and corporate interests looking to expand their operations in the Outer Rim. During the Separatist crisis, Araxis Secundus was chosen by Count Dooku to become the new capital of the faction and the home of the Separatist Parliament. The planet enjoyed a huge economic boom as opportunities flooded to the Separatist capital during the Clone Wars. Araxis and Gundus upgraded their industrial capabilities and shipbuilding operations during the conflict, and because they were the political center of the Confederacy, there was always a massive fleet guarding the planets. But then the Outer Rim siege occurred in the last year of the Clone Wars, and suddenly Araxis and Gundus was in the middle of the war. It was actually directly on the front lines. After the collapse of the Separatist Council, the Empire would occupy the world with clone legions and ATTE tanks. The Empire attempted to install a puppet leader in the form of Senator Avi Singh, but that proved to be unsuccessful. The last senator who tried to betray his people, Larrick, the guy we just talked about, well, he was assassinated by his own people. So, yeah, the people on Araxis do not mess around. They are very revolutionary at heart. The Empire under the command of Moff Wilhelm Tarkin would keep a close eye on the planet, looking for any remaining Separatist dissenters. They were basically everywhere. And due to its role in the conflict, Araxis was forced to pay massive reparations to the Empire on top of whatever debt it already owed to the IGBC, which was also absorbed by Palpatine. By 3 BBY, the planet of Araxis and Gundus had gone completely bankrupt and was under full Imperial occupation. It had just become another node in the larger Imperial military-industrial complex. In the opening moments of the Battle of Geonosis, Archduke Poggle the Lesser handed over a schematic for a massive moon-sized battle station for safekeeping to Count Dooku, leader of the Confederacy. Little did he know that single act would seal the fate of his planet and his people. After experiencing 2 devastating invasions by massive Republic forces, after surviving a Republic effort to use the Stalgazan Hive as labor to construct the battle station, things would actually get even worse for the Geonosians after the conflict ended. Poggle the Lesser would get slaughtered with the rest of the Separatist Council on Mustafar, and the Stalgazan Hive Queen appoints a new Archduke, but he's even dumber and more powerless than the last one. The Death Star becomes a priority project for the Empire, and production is stepped up in a significant way. Not only were Geonosian workers now toiling away at the massive project, slaves and droids were also brought into the mix. As dissent grew more and more in the Outer Rim, Moff Wilhelm Tarkin started cutting off Geonosis from the world. He started preventing contractors and visiting engineers from taking leave off of the planet. He basically started monitoring communications. The whole idea was to keep this project a secret. Eventually, when the shell of the planet was more or less complete, Tarkin would order the Death Star to turn on its sublight engines and fly into deep space. As a parting gift, after years of exploiting the resources and manpower of Geonosis, Wilhelm Tarkin would leave a series of poisonous canisters on the planet, which were designed to sterilize the entire population. Only one Geonosian would survive, and he would actually find the last remaining queen egg of their people, kind of like Ender Wiggins. And unfortunately, the story of that last queen is a horror. It's a horror show. Nothing really good happens to the Geonosians. And look, I'm all about humanity first. Deaf to aliens, especially hive mind alien species that I don't understand because of my ignorance. But I do have to say I have some empathy for the Geonosians. What happens to them is really rough. Sadly, the only thing the Geonosian species would be remembered for was their role in the Separatist crisis, and also their honey. Their honey was apparently delicious. Cato Nemoidia was one of the most important purse worlds of the Nemoidian people. A beautiful world with gigantic rock formations, acidic oceans, and cities suspended on bridges. I know Star Wars gets a lot of flack for, its lack of diversity when it comes to planets, desert planet, jungle planet, desert planet, ice planet, desert planet. And Cato Nemoidia, well, it really does break the mold. It's a very exotic and awesome and creative looking planet. I understand why the Nemoidians collected this planet. While Cato Nemoidia wasn't the home world of the Nemoidians, it was considered one of their most valuable possessions and treated as one of their capital worlds. It's also where the headquarters for one of the most powerful transportation companies in the galaxies was located, the Trade Federation, which also happened to be one of the founding members of the Confederacy of Advanced Systems. While the people in Nemoidia kind of distanced themselves away from the actions of Newt Gunray and what he did during the blockade of Naboo, The later gains that the Trade Federation made as a corporation were, kind of too hard to ignore for the Neimoidian people. They brought a lot of prosperity to their worlds. Unfortunately, that made the Neimoidians the perfect image of separatist corruption and deceit. The Republic and later Imperial propagandists had a field day with this. While Neimoidians only made up a small portion of the overall separatist population, they became hated by the Republic populace because of the Clone Wars and what they represented. Cadia Neimoidia would be besieged in the last year of the Clone Wars and would surrender to the Empire. Palpatine would seize control of the Trade Federation's wealth and assets, and the purse worlds of the Neimoidian people, including Cadia Neimoidia, would be garrisoned by the Empire. Most of the former assets of the Trade Federation were seized by the Empire, and while there was still some individual wealth kept by certain families here and there, the Neimoidians suffered quite a lot compared to other species during this time period. The interesting thing is, this was just a return to normalcy for the Neimoidians who, were kind of used to hardship and toil. Actually, the years leading up to the Clone Wars was probably some of the most prosperous that their species had ever enjoyed. Next up, we have Munilis, home of the intergalactic banking clan and the Mun people. It was also very much the financial center of the galaxy as a result. Due to the events on Scipio in the last year of the conflict, the intergalactic banking clan would be nationalized by the central government in an effort to promote stability in the financial system. The world itself had suffered greatly during the Battle of Munilis, which happened in the early years of the conflict. But even Emperor Palpatine understood not to mess with the Mun too much. In order to maintain power, the financial system must still be properly run, and only the Mun were actually capable of doing this. And so, after the conflict ended, Munilis once again became a hub for financial activity in the Empire. The management and leadership of the IGBC didn't really change all that much, except for maybe, Sandhill and some higher up individuals. And that's because any major move against the structure within the IGBC after the war could have led to panic and a galaxy-wide recession. The Mun's reputation might have been damaged slightly because they had, aided the Separatist alliance, but their bankers were still respected as skilled, pragmatic, and rational operators by the investment community. And not even Palpatine could control them completely. Palpatine, in a stroke of brilliance, would hide monetary tightening policies like restricting loans and business operations by the IGBC as a pseudo-punishment for their involvement in the war. This also allowed Imperial regulators to station monitors throughout the planet in important banks so that they can have complete control of what happened. The Mun made the bet that in the long run, as long as they stayed loyal and, kept their heads down, the Empire wouldn't bother them too much, and they were kind of right. Although they were almost wrong. They almost didn't survive. By the time the New Republic was in power, the IGBC would rise once again, ready to negotiate and work with the galaxy's new masters. Empires rise and fall, political orders change all the time, but the people who control the money, they typically don't go away. Skako Minor is actually not the homeworld of the Skakoan people. They actually hailed from the nearby planet of Skako. It was the Poltai people that called Skako Minor home. They probably didn't call it Skako Minor now that I think about it, and they suffered greatly when the Techno-Union established their massive industrial operations on the planet. Now, the Techno-Union remained neutral throughout the entire Clone Wars, just like the Trade Federation and the IGBC and the Commerce Guild and basically everyone else in the Separatist Council. But in the last year of the conflict, the Republic rescue mission ventured to the planet, violating Skako Minor's neutrality. It was only a sign of things to come, though. After Wat Tambor was killed by Darth Vader on Mustafar, Vader traveled to Skako Minor to kill his acolytes or any other Skakoans that were still loyal to him. This includes Wat Tambor's son. Skako Minor would be occupied by Imperial forces, and all of the technology and assets and research held by the Techno-Union would be nationalized as well. It was relatively easy to push out the remaining Skakoans from the planet, as they could only breathe in methane-heavy air, which had to be produced or shipped to the planet. Many years later, after the Battle of Yavin, a young nationalist named Jul Tambor, the grandson of Wat Tambor, hired pirates in an attempt to take back Skako Minor for his people, which of course only caused more problems for the locals who actually still lived there. In that way, Jul is a lot like his psychopath grandfather. Big ideas from big men resulting in horrible losses for the average person. So that's basically what happened to the Separatist Heartland after the Clone Wars. It's ruthless, very brutal. I think they came out worse than most of the people who had to experience the rise of the Empire, except for maybe the Jedi. And there's an important lesson to be learned here. We tend to view people who are at the head of the banking industry, industrial titans, transportation tycoons. We tend to look at the people that are in charge of mega conglomerates as the most powerful people in society. In some ways, that is true, but if you have a cunning political leader who is really willing to overstep the boundaries of, his mandates, well, those corporations will fold in a second, because at the end of the day, they are chasing financial gain and kind of cowardly. They typically don't try to fight back. And that is basically why all of these separatist heartland worlds are occupied, exploited, and devastated. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss on the rest of our awesome content. And as usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.